here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Ben of extreme metal group In This House of Mourning, sometimes referred to as ITHOM, who will be releasing their latest record this Friday, a record called Enlèvement. And thank you to Kyle from Good Boy PR for setting this interview up with me. This is another one of these cases where I wasn't familiar with the project before. I got to hear an advance promo. I immediately thought, this is ace. I love this. And I want to talk to someone involved in making it. And so that is how this all came about. To explain what Enlèvement and what In This House of Mourning sound like, I think the first reference point that I got was Celtic Frost. Ben also mentions Godflesh as being a big influence, and a band that I wasn't familiar with at the time, which is Dragged Into Sunlight, which I since listened to and discovered this is one of the nastiest sounding bands there is, which I'm also now a big fan of too. So yeah, this is extreme metal of a kind of a sludge industrial nature, I suppose, but I wouldn't really want to like jump to put tags on it. It's basically extreme metal. It's pretty slow. It's very dark. I love the tones and the textures and the atmosphere of it. And so we talk about that. There is one incidental thing to mention. So Ben wants to keep his musical project separate from his day job and his life outside of this project. So that is why you will find that his face is blurred out through the course of this interview. And another incidental thing to say, which is not particularly related to this specific interview, but I actually had got myself mixed up yesterday and I edited a whole other episode and got to the end of it and then realized like, oh, this album comes out in October, not in August. So I guess the silver lining is that about a month and a half down the line, I've got a podcast episode that is already ready. But that'll be coming, but not this week. So other than that, I guess I might also incidentally mention that at this point, there are about 8 interviews that I have done now, which are going to be put out over the coming weeks. And I think all of them just about were recorded since I made a firm decision that I'm actually going to start working on the book, which sort of is, in a way, a background to this whole podcast about underground independent music makers and sort of the various different aspects of the music world that have to be dealt with. So it's just a sort of incidental thing that if you notice that, this seems to be becoming more and more a part of the content in the interviews, it is no coincidence, because there are a few interviews coming up where I basically pitch to the people, I'd like to interview for this book, and do you also want to do a podcast episode? So I think you will notice that there will be more and more of a focus of these different topics. So for example, today with the interview with Ben, we do get into talking about like recording costs and, you know, the sort of the financial side of making an album. And there's some interesting conversations coming up in various different music business areas in forthcoming interviews. But for now, In This House of Mourning. So you can, I call it a band, but basically it really is Ben's project. But you can follow the band on Facebook or Instagram. There is going to hopefully be, or potentially be, a vinyl version of the album in the future. For now, come Friday, you can download from Bandcamp. You can stream it on the various different streaming services. Ben did actually say that he's already working on the next album. There is the possibility, as we talk about in the interview, that maybe there could be live shows in the future. But until that time, you can, enjoy the music online. So with all of that said, you can see what I'm doing with my own music at tomosmansounds.com. You can follow me at tomosmansounds. And I'm going to play a track from Enlèvement at the end of the interview, a little clip coming up just now. And with all of that said, Ben from In This House of Mourning, take it away.
Powerful
So then, first of all, I wanted to ask you about the title of the forthcoming album. Is it right to call it Enlèvement? Is that how I
Yes.
should pronounce it? So
Yes.
it's French, meaning something like kidnapping,
Yeah, or
abducting. Is that?
abduction. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yep.
what was the reason for choosing that name?
It was actually kind of random, like to be honest. Like I thought it would be a little weird or a little on the nose, just kind of call the record like kidnapping. I think that would be strange, or abduction, you know? So I was like, hey, like what other ways can I say this word? So, it's like any other writer, like looking at synonyms or this or that, and somehow the French word came about, and I was like, that actually has a really cool ring to it, you know?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, phonetics and the way that words sound in general can have a lot of impact beyond just the meaning of a specific word. So
Yeah, it's a sinister word to me. I just really like it. So
yes, and I suppose as well, like the fact that it is a foreign word, a lot of people are going to look at it and go, I don't know what this is, but it has a certain kind of uneasy quality to it, especially
yeah,
when you
absolutely.
when you put it alongside the picture that you've got there,
Yeah, for sure.
which is a dead horse.
I think it's a dead. I thought it was a dead cow. So I like. Well, obviously, like I'm into art and stuff like that. So I love finding cool photographs and just sort of turning that into something like even more dark, I guess you could say. The album is not as literal as it seems. It's just so fucked up that I think people probably think I'm a psychopath, but I think going a little bit deeper in, like once the whole record comes out, it'll all be a little more obvious, I think.
I guess like more in terms of the overall sound that you've got. So people haven't heard
Yep.
in this House of Mourning, and people that haven't heard the record. I think what attracted me to it straight away was the tone of it. Like I listened to a variety of different music, but there's something about like emotionally crushing, dark, brutal sounding music. And I see that you're wearing a Typo Negative top, and I love
Oh,
Typo
they're
Negative.
my one of my favorite bands. Yeah.
So there's just something about the tone, like I went through a period of my life, I don't know how it was for you, but I sort of got into like dark, heavy music kind of late
Me
to a
too.
certain degree.
Yeah.
And once I went down that path, it's like I was always trying to find something that would kind of scratch that itch more and more. And it's like Typo Negative or Celtic Frost or Swans. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily the most kind of like on the surface fastest or the most brutal music. So I'm wondering for you with this kind of music that you're making, what draws you to that kind of darkness in musical form?
Um, well, I mean, just starting aesthetically, I guess you could say. I mean, I'm a fairly dark person. Like, I mean, on one hand, without getting into the gory details, like there's a very massive, like kind part to me. And I think, you know, in the same way that sometimes, even though it's a terrible analogy, but like in the same way that sometimes like when somebody does something heinous and crazy in their community or something, and somebody's like, I can't believe that person did that. They were so nice. Most people, when they find out that I play music like this, they're always a little bit taken aback. So on one hand, like there's a very, very like kind part to me, like, when it comes to my job and like my family and things like that. But the world is really fucked up. Like, and I'm just one of those people where I do think about that sort of stuff a lot. So aesthetically, I've always been drawn to dark stuff. So, for example, when I was preparing for this, I thought a little bit about it. I mean, whether it's movies, old White Wolf games, like I don't know if you're into RPGs or not, but like I played a lot of White Wolf games, like World of Darkness. And, when I would run those role playing games, like where you have a setting with vampires and werewolves and like all the things that go bump in the night, I would run games for people, even at an early age. And like at the end of it, they'd be like, man, that was great, but what is wrong with you? And I don't have an answer. Like, I'm doing my best here, but I've always kind of been attracted to dark stuff. Now, if we're talking about like tone, like, musical tone, like why is it so dark? I think it's because everything else out there is so fucking sterile and bright and bullshit and digital, which I think is kind of hysterical. Like I was talking to my producer, and we were talking about this record, and yeah, don't get me wrong. Does it sound lo-fi in the same way as like a early 90s Godflesh record? Yes, absolutely. Was that intentional? I don't think so. when I play guitar, when I play bass, right? I mean, there's no pedals in front of anything. There's no bullshit happening. It's just an amp, a kind of shitty 70s guitar. And I think when you blend the guitar and the bass together, like, and the kind of gear I used, you're just going to get that gnarly tone. And I do think, you know, this whole band is supposed to be an ode to extreme metal. And it's an ode to the 90s in a lot of ways. So for my ears, when I'm dialing a tone in, that is kind of what I'm going for.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up what you're playing and that kind of sort of Godflesh adjacent grimy sound. Because one of the things I was thinking about was that of the various different elements that I really appreciate that really attracted me to the record, one of them is that it just sounds really kind of visceral and impactful. The drums have got real oomph to them, and like the bass as well, and just all the instrumentation. And I was wondering, in terms of getting that sound, how much was that a matter of just the performances and the equipment that you've got versus what you did from a recording production point of view?
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about just like the recording of it, why don't we just sort of start at the beginning, like of process, right? So generally speaking, what I do is I usually start writing at home, and usually it is through like a Logic or a GarageBand, whatever I kind of feel like using, just in terms of like getting all of the ideas down. And once that's done, and I have a sense of what the record, and I do plan everything out in terms of records, like how is the record going to sound. It's not usually song by song, because there's always a story that kind of binds everything together, which we can get into if you want. But basically what I do is I take that scratch and I take it to the studio, right? And the studio that I use, we kind of refer to it as the underground layer. It's in Astoria, Queens, and the producer is named Adi Pandit, and he's recorded a lot of New York bands that you might know or you might not know. And he's got awesome gear, right? So what we basically do is we get in there, we dial our tones in. So for the first record, really it was a JCM 800, like an old 1986 JCM 800 that I own. It's literally in the other room, and it's just a really gnarly sounding amp. But for this one, because I wanted something with a little bit more gain, we went with a Mesa Boogie, and I believe it was this a 7, if my memory serves me right, I think. So in terms of sitting down and actually recording, I just write the riffs that I sort of hear. I think the darkness that you kind of might get is really the synths and the noise and the vocals and the story, right? Because if I were singing about fairies or something on this record, it probably, even if all the music was the same, it probably wouldn't have the same weight. It's like the lyrics, which, you know, most of them are intelligible. Like you can actually hear what the words are, which is very different than a lot of other bands. I wanted people to hear the vocals. I wanted people to know what I'm saying. It is a fucked up story. And I think when you put everything together, you just get a very dark, disturbing sound and disturbing record.
Yeah, it's funny. In terms of lyrics, when I was listening to the record and I was taking some notes, and I was thinking about another aspect of the record that I really like which is the vocals and the vocal style. Yeah. And I was writing like, oh, I really like this strangled vocal approach. And then just as I wrote that, I heard strangled or strangling in the lyrics. I was like, aha, yeah, that's quite appropriate. So maybe from that point of view, you can tell me about the themes and the story of the album.
Sure. So it's very much like an entendre in a lot of ways, right? Like I absolutely have always loved bands and artists who you sort of make something and allow somebody to take whatever it is that they want from the record. What I try to do when it comes to the story of the record, like the lyrical concept, I try to layer things in. So for example, if you want to start just like really simple, right? I don't know about you, but like the movie Fire in the Sky was absolutely a terrifying movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have not.
So in a lot of ways, like, so if you've never seen the movie, basically, it's a story of a dude that got abducted by aliens, or that's what he claims, back in, I believe it was the 70s. And whoever that, I don't even know who directed it, but essentially, like, this movie got made in the 90s, and I can remember being a little kid seeing it, and this guy is recollecting what happened to him, and there's a scene where he's basically suffocating inside of what almost looks like a giant condom. And in a lot of ways, like, you could probably just keep that image in your mind and listen to the record, and the whole record will make sense in a lot of ways. So shit like the X-Files, Fire in the Sky, like White Wolf games. So in a lot of ways, like, if we're thinking of like the story of this abduction, it kind of comes from there. But let's say you do want to be more literal, right? Like, I mean, let's say you really kind of want to look at those lyrics, right? I would surmise that anybody that's listening to this right now, no matter how good of a person they may be, or you, for example, listening to me explain this, I'm rather sure you've probably had a moment where somebody has cut you off, somebody flipped you the bird, somebody like let a door swing in your face, and maybe you can't explain it, but you just want something terrible to happen to that person. I would surmise most people have had that feeling. In a lot of ways, like, that's what this record is about. It's about those, sort of kind of moments, And if the person is kind of awful, like, for example, maybe you have an awful neighbor who you cannot figure out why, but they just make your life miserable no matter how hard you try to be nice, they are not. Well, then this record will probably appeal to you, right? So there's a couple of layers there. I would say there's one more layer. So if you want to kind of go the societal sort of route, right? So if you want to think about like how this record is a reflection on, at least for me, like as a writer, like what I see in the world. Let's just think about ourselves, right, as a society. So, I mean, we thumb our nose at the Romans, for example, who would have gladiatorial games and bloodshed, and they would basically see it as entertainment. Well, think about the millions of dollars that Netflix makes on true crime. Think about all those fucking assholes out there that have podcasts and talk gleefully with people listening gleefully about real people that have been absolutely massacred. So in a lot of ways, that's kind of what I sort of meant in the press release to some extent, where it's like, yes, I wrote all of this, right? Like, and I'm not better than anybody, right? Like, I watch this stuff. I'm interested in it, right? Dragged into Sunlight is probably my favorite band. Like, so I'm just as guilty as anybody. But that being said, if you're the kind of person that looks at the themes in this record and you don't like it, but you're at home like watching the upteen thousandth, biopic about Charlie Manson or the BTK killer or whoever, then sorry, like, you're not as good as you think you are, I guess. So if you think about all those layers, all of that kind of fits into this record. And that's why I think that it does kind of feel the way that it does. It almost feels like somebody's sitting on you. And that's kind of what I was going for.
Yeah, that's a good description. And that was perfect timing that you brought up Dragged into Sunlight, because I was going to ask you about them. So there was like a few reference points that I saw mentioned that made sense to me, like Celtic Frost. I think that was like one of the first things that I thought of, and Godflesh as well. And I wasn't actually familiar with Dragged into Sunlight. And then I went off and listened to them, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. They're
like awesome.
They make almost anything else seem kind of serene, because it's just so utterly violently hateful. And
they've ruined me. Yeah, they've ruined me in a lot of ways, because and again, like, back in the day, we would call it dick riding, which is probably what I'm doing right now. But like, I have no shame about highlighting these bands, because again, like, in a lot of ways, what I'm hoping is that in 30 years, right, like somebody is like, oh, in the early 2000s or the 90s or whatever, there were these bands. Oh, and this band, ITHOM, or In This House of Mourning, whatever you want to call the project. Oh man, they really carried that legacy on. That's important to me. So with a band like Dragon and Sunlight, I don't think there's any band that's heavier. And ultimately, what I respect about them so much, and even though I don't play as well as them, like, I think obviously they have to some extent, a very different sound than kind of what I'm going for, at least in my ears. I hear that. But when you go and see them live, or you go and see them put something out in the same way as like a Primitive Man, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but like,
for
right.
Sure.
So if you look at those bands, when you see them, they believe everything they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, right? When you see Dragged into Sunlight, like it's still an act, right? Obviously, anytime you get on stage, there's always a theatrical element, but there's some integrity there, right? Whereas, again, like there are so many other bands out there that are singing about Satan, and then you look at like a press photo and they're all fucking smiling, you know? So, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, like, I hope I'm answering your question, but like, this record is trying to be in the same ballpark as those other bands that I admire a lot. And again, I don't think I sound like a lot of my influences, probably because I just don't play as well as some of my influences, but everything is on purpose with this record. Literally everything from start to finish. It's also probably the first record that I've ever put out. And I think this is probably with this and Mountain God, I think this is my fifth record. It's the first record I've ever done where I'm happy with every part of it. Whereas there's no like note in there that, oh man, I wish I would have played something different. So,
Well, keeping on Dragged into Sunlight for a moment, something that I was thinking about when I was listening to their album Hatred for Mankind today, and I was sort of wondering how this would compare for you and your feelings about your music, is that listening to the album, you know, they've got these samples and there'll be references to horrible atrocities in them. And I think that it's a very powerful, sort of ambiguous aspect to it where you're like, these are distressing topics. I don't really know what comment the band is making on them, but you get the sense that there is an aspect of sort of societal disgust that comes with them sort of like reflecting these things which are going on. So I wonder, is that something for you in terms of what you're doing, that it's sort of, there's a catharsis in the sense of expressing your disgust towards things out there in the world?
yeah, I think so. I mean, again, like I think I said at the very beginning, when I put music together, especially in this band, it's usually things. I'm usually writing about things. I'm usually looking at the world and taking the things that I don't like, and I'm usually writing almost from that perspective. Again, like, are there good people, quote unquote, good people or whatever, or neutral people or whatever? Sure, absolutely. I like to think I'm decent, you know, but there's also like a lot out there there isn't. And when I'm writing, when I perform, or when this band does perform, it is going to kind of like reflect my feelings on the world, and almost like to some extent both reflect my feelings but also kind of hold a mirror up, because you know what, here's the thing. You could, not you, but like I can understand why somebody would find my music awful or, you know, like repugnant, repellent. I could see people feeling the same way about Dragged into Sunlight. You know what I mean? Even like if you're a person sitting there and, you know, there is like a sample, you know, of a Jeffrey Dahmer quote or something along those lines, I can see why somebody would really like be hurt by that, especially if they're empathetic and especially if like somehow they're sort of connected to it. But at the same time, it's like, well, you're there. You're at the show. Like, you know who this band is. Do you know what I mean? So ultimately what it comes down to is, yeah, like I don't think I'm an angry person. I don't think I am. But there are definitely certainly things about the world that we live in that really bother me that I don't have any control over. And it's sometimes nice to take some of that negativity and put it out into the world through art as opposed to in other like really like shitty and harmful ways. Because again, like I don't know about you, but like there are plenty of times where horrifying things come into my brain, especially involving people, right? Like, again, you know, you're at a convenience store and somebody just treats you horribly in that moment about something. I would be lying to say that really negative thoughts don't pop into my head, but I also don't act on them except in music.
Yeah, I think you've reminded me. I think it was Gary Holt. I forget what the documentary was, but he was like talking about how like, yeah, every day I basically fantasize about killing people.
Yeah, but I would argue most people do. I think it's a very human thing, right? Like, I mean, going back as far as you can go, there's always been love and there's always been misery and hate and violence, literally since the beginning of time. I wish I didn't have thoughts like that. I wish I didn't have negative thoughts like that. But I think that anybody that's listening to this, that's like, I don't think that way. You're way less normal than me. That's how I would put it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the way that you channel these things is obviously very significant. And you can, like, when I say you, the way that one channels these things, you can, I think I tend to channel my negative emotions through like intense, brutalizing exercise, whether it's doing Thai boxing or running. It's like something that's kind of like self mortification, but in a way that's, hopefully not too self destructive.
No, totally. I think there's a reason that psychologically that we all have these kind of outlets. When people didn't have these outlets, we slaughtered each other. If you think about the history of the world, right? It was relatively normal 1,000 years ago to end a dispute through murder or through something really negative, right? And when that kind of went out of style, I think we obviously as a society, and this is not a bad thing, obviously, we replaced it with other sort of ways of getting our aggression out. So,
Yeah, no, that does make sense. There's a couple of different things I want to get onto that we've already touched on. So, talking about your vocals.
sure.
So, one of the first reference points I think that I felt with this, like, sort of, like, I think you've got a couple of different styles that you have on the latest record. And this sort of strangled style that I mentioned, it specifically makes me think of the Celtic Frost track, Dying God Coming into Human Flesh.
Yes. 100%. I love Celtic Frost. I love that record in particular. Like I I'm not I am a massive fan of the band, but I definitely prefer Monotheist to the other records. Right. So Tom, is definitely a very big influence on my singing style. I will say, though, that the way that the vocals went down for this. So you might notice that in the liner notes, I often will abbreviate, people's names that help with the record. I originally wasn't going to sing on this record, believe it or not. I originally did some scratch vocals and was going to have a friend of mine who is a far better singer than me actually do them. And I wrote everything out. And obviously, like, I felt pretty connected to the story, right? And I holed up in a little apartment, like totally like DIY, like had my laptop, had my couple microphones or whatever. And I just sort of did the vocals. And again, don't get me wrong, like I sang in Mountain God and you would probably notice some overlap between those vocals and this, but this just came out very differently. And it was one of the things where I showed it to Adi, and at first I was kind of like, yeah, like we should get so and so, like let's get him on the phone. And he was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like these are incredible. Like these sound great. And we didn't tinker with them a ton. Like my voice has always, I am not a natural singer. I actually don't really know how to sing. So like the reason that my vocals sound the way that they do is probably because I'm doing it wrong. Like I'm not really singing from my diaphragm. It's more like throat singing, I guess you could say. So I always have needed a little bit. So whether it's a little bit of fuzz or a little delay or a little reverb. So obviously we touch them a little bit, but not a ton. So what you hear is just a person who's not a good singer, just in a very visceral way, belting stuff out. And it just sort of worked. And I'm actually working on the follow-up to this record now. And now that I kind of have that confidence, because I am like very much like a self-deprecating musician in a lot of ways. Like there are plenty of people that are way better musicians than me. And that's objective, like in a lot of ways. But my voice is not only coming back, but also kind of coming into its own, where there is something to be said about if you really kind of want something to go well, sometimes you can will it to go well. And I feel like all the sort of negative attachments that I have to the concepts that I go for in these songs lends itself well to the style, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of a wild story.
Yeah. I'm quite fascinated with this topic of the freedom to have really kind of wild vocal expression. I was interviewing someone recently of a project, Hypermanic Daydream, and she has this really wild, often like falsetto vocal style. And when I was talking to her, she was saying that, well, I felt that like there's so much extreme metal that doesn't have extreme vocals. The music will be really wild and the vocals will just be kind of like quite like
Yeah.
predictable. And so from her point of view, it was important to try and create something where the sort of insanity of the vocals fit the insanity of the music. And it's something that I've been struggling with, even though the music that I make isn't metal. I feel like I haven't managed to get to like a real kind of visceral primal expression of myself through my vocals. So I'm wondering for you, like, how have you found yourself in a place, whether that's like physical or mental, where you've gone, I feel I have the confidence to express myself in a way that's, authentic?
I could say it this way. I find that I'm more creative when I have a very small group of people around me that I trust to work with, as opposed to a traditional band setting. Well, why don't we start there? I, most of the time, felt awful when I was in Mountain God. And Mountain God was my first real band. Like, I got started, I know you were saying this too, like, kind of got into heavy music late. So did I. Like, in a lot of ways, like, I didn't start really putting myself out there until I was in my early 30s. And in Mountain God, it was always me trying to chase something that I wasn't. It was always about making something creative for the sake of it, to not sound like other people, and always having all these fucking chirping, voices in your ears telling you what to do. So I think for me, isolation is what has helped me be creative. I don't have anybody telling me whether something sounds good or not. I'm just sort of doing it. So if you're talking about like the idea of finding your voice, I think the longer you're at it, I think the more time you put in and the more you can almost like deal with yourself. And what I mean by that is accept where you are, what you're capable of, all of that. I find that that kind of acceptance will allow you to kind of push to be kind of like even better, if that makes sense. I'll also say this, and I can't like understate this. I believe every single one of those vocal lines, right? Like, obviously there's more to the story of this record than I'm kind of giving you. All I can say is there's a particular face that when I picture that face, it just kind of gets me somewhere in here where I can belt out those kind of screechy, nasally, hate-filled vocals. And again, that's a part of myself that when you put me in front of a microphone or put me in front of an audience, that's the only place where that stuff comes out. In the same way that, like, I'm rather sure, that artists or authors, Stephen King, whoever, I'm rather sure that like they have their medium to get out their unique kind of voice, and then an hour later they're at the coffee shop like acting like a normal person. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that.
And you've touched on live performances a couple of times. How important for you is that side of musical expression?
Well, at first, if we're just talking about this band, at first, this was never meant to be played live. It was really a studio project. Now, you might be wondering why. Because trying to be in an underground band and have people all be on the same page and find people that are reliable, to find gigs that are worth playing, all of that, it's really difficult. And in my previous band, I kind of got burnt out of it. Especially all the fucking hubnubbing with people, or hobnob, or whatever that phrase is, like all the bullshit dealing with egos, all the bullshit dealing with booking agents, getting in front of an audience to play to 10 people for a long period of time. Like, I did that. And when I started this band, I said to myself, I don't want to do those things anymore. I think, though, part of the reason for my change in attitude when it comes to the idea of playing live shows, like, because I do want to play this stuff live, and we can talk about it, what that's going to look like in a second. I think what has changed for me is the fact that I know that this band, no matter how big it got, it'll never be my life. It'll always be something that I do for fun. I'm never going to make any money from this. Even if I did, I wouldn't make much. It's a fucking horrifying time to be a musician in terms of making money. So I have a job, a really good one. Like, money is not an issue for me. Like, so with ITHOM, I do want to get out there and I do want to get on stage. Yes to like give somebody a good experience, but for me it's I really like this music, and in a lot of ways, like, yes, it's a sonic art, but I see these lyrics and the music and everything in a very visual way as well. So I want to get up there, and I have a very clear vision of what this will be when it happens. Um, we're going to play with a drum machine, and that set of samples is going to kind of like have all the synth and noise behind it, and then all the guitars, all the bass, all the vocals, all that stuff is going to be live. It is going to be a very visual experience. I already have a friend of mine who is basically willing to put together like a visual set of visuals for the band. So essentially, what you can kind of picture, and just to be clear, like, I'm not going to do it any other way. It has to be like this, or else I'm just not going to fucking do it. We're going to get industrial sized fog machines and blast the front of the stage with fog and project images on it. Nobody's really going to see us. And we're going to terrify people. That I want like somebody to experience this show and leave saying that was really, really, really fucked up and depressing. That is a goal of mine. So it's a facet of the band that I haven't got to kind of like fruition yet, but it's in the works. So ultimately, to answer your question, playing live, even if it's only a couple of times a year, even if it's to 10 people, I'll like it. And that's kind of like all I care about to some extent. So
no, that's very, very interesting what you say about the live dimension. So I'm reading this book at the moment by John Fine, who used to be in Bitch Magnet and Don Caballero, and he's got a band at the moment called We Contain Multitudes. And he wrote this book called Your Band Sucks, about his experience of playing independent music through the late 80s and 90s, I guess. And one of the things that he mentioned in the book that I found fascinating was he was talking about what it was that he was making music for. And he was saying, like, some people get into making music because they want to be adored. But for him, he got into making music because he wanted to dominate. And he's like, there are certain artists where it's like, he mentions, interestingly, he's like Beyonce, Madonna, Miles Davis, Swans. Like, they're artists that don't go out for you to love them. You might like appreciate them, and you might like hold them up as idols, but they want to like create some kind of overwhelming destruction for you. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, obviously people get into making music for different reasons. Some people get into making music because they want to be rich. Some people want to be famous. Some people, it's like some kind of catharsis, some kind of emotional release they need, an artistic release that they need, or they want to like give some kind of impact. So it sounds to me, at least from the live point of view for you, it is about the experience that you want to present for people. That's kind of what you're driving towards.
Absolutely. And for myself. And again, like, music, to be positive for 1 second in this in this chat. I mean, music has always been a really, really important part of my life. It's not that I'm not the most alienated person in the world. Like, often, like, if somebody that knew me heard me use that word, they would call it bullshit, like, because I'm a very, like, in a way, like, gregarious person. Like, I'm a conversationalist, I could do all of those things and not appear to be like some kind of weirdo. But inside, I've always felt like a little bit of an outlier. Where I don't feel like an outlier is in a lot of cases at concerts. Concerts have always been that place where no matter who people are in the audience, they're all more or less there for a shared experience. I do want to give that to people. I do want to put on a show where it's like, we are not in a stadium. We are in a little bar, or we're in a little venue, right? But I want to own the stage in such a way that you get the feeling of something bigger happening. And I'm completely taking that from one of my favorite bands. Neurosis is one of my favorite bands, like, of all time, right? And they used to do that shit all the time in the 90s, right? Because remember, like, the whole thesis of this band is, in a lot of ways, obviously, like, it's my own songs and things like that, but it is kind of an ode to a different time, right? When Neurosis would play CBGBs, They would have visuals up, they would have smoke, they would be putting on a show like the room was theirs. And that is definitely something that I want to do. Now, do I want to upstage people? Not entirely, but there is something really powerful about getting up there and just making the next band uncomfortable. Like, oh shit, like I really don't want to follow them. I'd be lying if I weren't going to say that that would kind of be a goal. Not in a horribly mean-spirited way, but like there is something to be said. It's like Nietzsche. Like there is something to be said about like trying to become the Superman, right? To do your best. Because again, like that'll be really quotable because every asshole in the world thinks that, you know, Nietzsche was a Nazi. And it's like, go and actually read what he had to say. Because like the you know, the Ubermenschen, like the Uberman, like all that stuff has nothing to do with any of that. It's about being the best possible version of yourself you can be. For me, that's what I want a live show to be like. I want somebody to be exhausted when that 30 minutes of music is over.
Yeah, Neurosis are a great reference point, and I also love Neurosis. And, you know, going back to my sort of delving into metal, that was a band when I was sort of like searching out for things which was like in their own way darker and more extreme. Neurosis was a point I got to. I was like, oh yes, now this is scratching an itch on
Yeah.
some deep kind of emotional level because it is incredibly heavy. And I tend to like overuse the word apocalyptic when talking about Neurosis. Like particularly, probably my favorite of theirs is Through Silver and Blood, which is
Yeah.
just so like impactful, and like that track Eon towards the end of it, like I just,
Awesome.
the whole arc and build of that track is incredible, and
Yeah.
it has such a profound impact on me.
Yeah, I've seen them live a couple of times. And there was one show where they played at St. Vitus in the city, which is like unbelievably small venue, you know. And they opened with the title track, you know, Through Silver and Blood or whatever. And again, in the same way that I described Dragged into Sunlight earlier, the same way I would describe Primitive Man, you know, they are so intense and just basically believe everything that they're saying and everything that they're playing. And that to me is like what makes things heavy. Like you could be some shitty deathcore, death metal, fucking, you know, there's so many bad bands out there. And I think in part it's because it's so easy now to make music, right? It's not like the 70s or the 80s where if you didn't know what you were doing and you went into a studio, either the label would replace you and just not say anything on the record, right? It would be you, but not really you playing, right? Or you just don't make music. Now it is just the complete opposite, right? Like where anybody, and again, like there could be some positive to this, right? Like to some extent. But the bottom line is, right, like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing can use technology as a means to like kind of cover things up. Now, why am I saying this, right? Because that's what's different between, you know, a band like Neurosis and bands like that, where a band like that I'm describing will get up there with their shitty digital amplifiers, with everything sounding like you're in a doctor's office. Yet they're all wearing black, or they're wearing fucking corpse paint, or they're talking about burning churches. And then next thing you know, you see them outside, you know, and, you know, they're signing autographs for 13-year-old girls, right? With no offense to girls, obviously. But like, you can understand what I'm saying. That's what separates Neurosis from many, many, many other bands. And to me, that's what separates what really heavy means versus bands that think they're heavy.
Yep. I think that completely makes sense because it's something that I've thought about, not even necessarily just with metal, but also with rock. Like there was a time where, I mean, I guess you can kind of like, you can go back in history and look at different music that was sort of shocking in one way or another when it came out. And so like, if you think about Metallica when they first appeared, like the metal got to a point, and there were many other points afterwards, and there were points before, where it's like something became uglier and it was dirtier and it was louder and it was more kind of like abrasive. But at a certain point, certain like aspects of rock that we sort of took to be shocking at one point in history, like overdriven guitars, they just got co-opted into
Yes.
pop music. And so
Yep.
now, kind of like with what you're describing, you can take these elements that you're kind of like, well, on the surface, these are like heavy, but they lose their heavy impact because they just become
Yeah.
something that's totally streamlined.
So by the way, like if you want to get into my mind, I think about stuff like this all the time. So it's like if you're like the angst that's in me, this is basically kind of where it comes from, right? For whatever better or worse. Because like I agree with you completely, right? So if you think about, let's use the Metallica example, right? So death metal comes out of thrash, right? Which, in a lot of ways is good, right? A new form of extreme metal. Thrash is not extreme enough. And it's like you always get those one or two bands that do it and do it really well. And then what comes after that is just garbage, right? And sometimes that garbage becomes even bigger than the person who kind of like originated it, right? Or the band that sort of originated. And I think that has been happening since music has been happening, right? We sometimes idealize the past, right? We look at bands like the Beatles or whatever, or the Beach Boys, and it's like we think of those bands. And yes, like those are absolutely killer bands. But what we sometimes forget is not every band was good back then either. Like how many awful ripoffs of the Beach Boys, how many awful ripoffs of, the Beatles, came after them. And so it's always been happening. The best example of that to me now, I always like both love and hate Meshuggah, right? Because they're one of the bands that like take technology and like digital amps and all that stuff and make it sound good. And they birth some of the worst bands, like honestly, like some of the worst bands. Like, and again, like I would be lying to say that like if that rage that's in me about listening to that stuff, or for example, and again, I'll say it, right? I don't give a shit. Watching a band like Sleep Token like sell out the Barclays Arena, like, right? Like where 1 second they're doing like gent style Meshuggah, and the next second like they're dancing around on stage, like playing pop music or whatever. That to me is like the co-opting, and that to me is why I think the underground scene needs to kind of keep going. If that makes sense.
For sure. And I'm curious to know from your point of view, like when it comes to production, because you talked about that a bit before with the forthcoming album, the sound that you were going for. This is like very incidental, but so I live here in Glasgow in Scotland, but I travel through to Oxford in England very often. This is like a 350-mile drive. And so I just drive on my own back and forth. And so this particular drive, when I was coming back from Oxford, I have this CD collection of the first Rollins Band releases from the very first EP up through Hard Volume. And I started listening to the first one, and then I thought like, I'm just going to put on Hot Animal Machine. And then I was like, I'm going to put on Lifetime. And then I thought, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to listen to nothing but Rollins Band chronologically all the way through this trip. And I got about halfway through Come In and Burn. And then I was pretty much there. And I was like, okay, right, that's enough.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this because I love Rollins Band, and Henry Rollins has been a huge influence and inspiration for me for many years. But on the other hand, a lot of that stuff is sort of, like you get obsessed with music and you get obsessed with things at a certain time in your life. And then you hold on to some of these things and you let go of other things. And then there are certain things that you maybe say to yourself, like, oh, this is one of my favorite albums of all time. But then it's just like, but when did I actually last listen to this?
Sure.
So it's kind of interesting for me to go through these records, because I would have said to people for a long time, like, oh, my favorite Rollins Band album is The End of Silence. Like, this is one of my favorite albums of all time. But it was interesting listening to all these albums. I got up to Lifetime, and I listened to it and I was like, I think this is a perfect album. Like,
yeah,
the playing is incredible. It's really tight. It has these different dimensions to it. It's got like really extreme performances from Rollins. You can hear things that he would go on to do and expand in The End of Silence. And I got through The End of Silence and I was like, still love this record, but in some ways, I don't want to say it's overblown, but you can hear that they were doing more things with production.
Yeah.
And you could hear as well, they were going, let's try expanding these songs to like 7, 8, 9, 10-minute songs. I love it for certain kind of emotional, historical reasons connected to my life. But I'm wondering for you, do you have kind of like strong opinions when it comes to like, production values, for example? Are you quite kind of, I don't want to say necessarily militant, but do you find that there comes a certain point that's like, if the production values get too high, it's like something is automatically lost, more or less?
Yeah, I do. I do think that. Yeah. To me, right, when I'm in the studio and when we're producing music, to me, if we had a budget of $1 million, let's just say, and somebody, offered us a deal or something, and you follow what I'm saying, right? Like if money were not an object and you could go into any studio you want, my I hope that if I were in that situation, I would record the same way. Maybe I might use a different guitar, and maybe I might use a different head. But the bottom line is, like, if we're talking about production tricks, to me, anything that you do in the studio that takes away from the vibe and the sound of what you originally produced out of a tube amplifier, I think in most cases that's a real problem, right? The reason my music sounds the way that it does is because there is a guitar head, there is a cabinet. Sometimes we use a couple, and you take a microphone and you put it in front of that speaker, and that is what's called authentic, right? So I don't know if I can think of examples in the moment of bands that I like. If I, if I'll probably email you, like, I mean, because I'm rather sure there's probably something out there that was just overproduced and turned into garbage. I just can't think of anything right now. But the bottom line is, like, I'm hoping that maybe I'll frame it like this. I'm hoping that the way that I record now is because it's the way that I want to record, and I'm using what I have in order to do that, and I would hope that I don't kind of lose out on that, like in some kind of integrity way, if I had, a million different choices of how to record something.
Well, in terms of sound, and thinking from the perspective of, let's say, someone who's listening to this that's got a band or wants to start a band, and they're thinking like, okay, I want to record an album. What do you think are sort of realistic costs that a person should have to expend if they've got a full band? Like, let's say there's a drum kit involved.
Oh, I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars. Like, if you're talking, are you specifically asking, like, financially, like,
Yeah,
to record?
if people are going to have to record an album.
I mean, dude, I hate to say it, but, like, for an underground band, it's probably not even worth it. I mean, like, I'm lucky because my friend and my writing partner essentially has a ridiculously awesome fucking studio. I don't know, man. Like, I'm just being honest with you. Like, I don't know. Like, if I was paying, $500 an hour, to record, that's where technology can be a great thing. So I'm on one hand shitting all over digital technology, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with self-recording, especially if you know how to do it, right? Pro Tools, GarageBand, Logic, all of those programs that we use nowadays to record, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with any of that, right? But what I would also say, learn how to learn how to mic a fucking guitar cabinet, right? Like, if you're going to record yourself, anybody can do that, right? And with YouTube and the way things are today, like, you can get all the information that you could possibly need about how to basically do it yourself, if you have a little bit of money and you have friends and, like, you need to, like, mic up a drum set, I'm rather sure there are people out there that can record for you. It's just going to cost like an arm and a leg. Now, here is where I think everything I just said can go wrong. If you're some 18-year-old kid listening to this and you love music, what do I think you shouldn't do? Like, I don't think that you should go on GarageBand and record a lick and then just repeat it over and over and just cut it and paste it all over the place. I think you should sit down and write a song, like, from start to finish. Like, that to me is where, that's how you write a good song ultimately. You sit down, you kind of put everything together, and you kind of go at it, like, whether it's one take or a couple of takes. I don't think that you should kind of, like, just write riffs and just throw shit together. Otherwise, you'll sound like Sleep Token. And anybody who argues that that's not the case, go and look at their interviews. That's literally what they do. Like, and again, to me, like, I don't know why I'm ripping on this. Actually, I do know why I'm ripping on this band so much. The reason I'm ripping on it is because there are so many people out there that don't want to seem like old farts that pretend to like them and pretend that they're actually good because they don't want to seem probably how I seem right now, which is, oh, all the best music was in the 90s, They are not good. And literally, that is what music is kind of becoming. This weird, like, cut and paste bullshit where you then have to kind of go and, like, learn how to play your own songs. Sorry, that was a rant. I don't know. Did I actually answer? Did I actually answer your question?
You 100% answer my
Look,
question. Yeah.
Colin Marston, right? He is a ridiculous producer, producer. Like he has, recorded so many awesome bands in the city. If you believe in your shit enough and you don't care about recouping money, give him a call. Like there are people like that. It just costs money. And being in an underground band, how are you going to make that money back? You gotta hustle, you got to get on tours. Like there's a lot that kind of needs to happen. So maybe that's another way to kind of cap that question, right? If you are going to spend money in the studio and you're not some wealthy trust fund kid, right? You're going to have to figure out a way like how to recoup all of those losses or just eat them.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
And so just having spoken about the fact that you've got, a different way that you make a living and that you're making music without the kind of like financial expectation or like the burden of a financial expectation attached to it. Do you have some other kind of creative outlet? Do you have other ongoing bands or the musical projects or other artistic projects in general?
I do, but I can't really talk about it because if I do, it'll be so easy for somebody to find me. And don't get me
Fair
wrong,
enough.
like there's not like it's not that I have any shame in this band or like the things that we're talking about today. It's just like I said, I kind of like to kind of keep those
Sure.
things to side. But to answer your question, maybe in somewhat of a cryptic way, yes, I have a lot of hobbies. Like I purposely chose not to have kids because I have lots of stuff to do. But if you want to address music, like specifically, no, right now. When it comes to playing music, it is strictly this band. It's ITHOM, and could I see myself like joining another band or a project or something like that? I don't know, maybe, but like the reason that I want to play this music out live is because I really believe in it. I don't know if I would kind of join somebody else's band and, go out to the bar on a Wednesday night and have to be up the next morning at 5 a.m. and like put a shirt and tie on. I don't know if I'm not at that point in my life anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do have like a ton of creative outlets, which we could talk about off this pod at some point if you'd like.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. And so then thinking about the release of the album, so it's going to come out on August the 8th.
Yeah.
I presume that if people want to buy a digital copy, they should go to the band's Bandcamp page.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, let's be honest. I mean, people probably aren't going to do that. Like I wouldn't. I mean, if some kind soul out there is like, I want to, pay you money for something I'm just going to be able to stream anyway, all the power to you.
Let's not, undermine the possibility. I appreciate a lot of people don't do that, but there are plenty of people out there that buy music on Bandcamp.
Why don't I say this, right? So ultimately, yes. Let's just give you the more direct answer. Yeah, of course, right? I'll the whole record's going to go up on Bandcamp, just like the last record that I did. All of that stuff will be there. I think the direction I would rather go, though, is the potential of pressing the record. And I'm already working on the follow-up, and that'll probably come out whenever we're ready to play live. I'd rather, like, if you want to buy something from this band, so to speak, I think I'm rather going to focus more on like merch, like shirts. And like I said, if I can press the record, without it being exorbitant. I mean, Mountain God was signed to a label. We pressed our last record with Artificial Head Records in Texas. I'm sure we can find somebody that would press it, and that's actually what I'd rather sell, if that makes sense.
For sure.
So,
well, I was going to ask you about that because I saw in the press release it said that there was the possibility that there were going to be physical versions, but there was nothing that was confirmed yet.
It just wasn't confirmed because it's not something we sorted out kind of in advance. It'll be the sort of thing that if somebody wants to pick it up or somebody wants to pick up the band and think that they can get a couple of shekels from pressing it, I think that'd be amazing. Like, again, like I'm kind of late to the party. I got my first record player in December, actually.
Okay.
Which is, I purposely, like you were alluding to my other hobbies. I definitely have a couple of addicting hobbies. And I would always kind of joke with my wife that like this was not something that I needed. And now, in addition to like my hatred for the world, now all I think about is like where are record stores? In other words, I would love to hear this on vinyl. I think it would sound fucking great, you know? So that'll definitely be something that we, you know, the little team behind the band kind of strives for. So,
Yeah, I definitely have a bit of a thing for vinyl. Even though, as you can see behind me, like I don't have that many records, but up to a couple of years ago, I was living in first Czech Republic and then Germany.
yeah.
And even for this relatively small amount of records, to get these back from Berlin to here was a massive
Can't
fucking
even
pain in the
imagine. I
arse.
can't even imagine it. Well, they are. I can see why. I can see why that would be the case, and they are very finicky. Records are very, very, very finicky, but they sound great. You know, and like it almost to me like, especially if you have great speakers, you know, it almost feels like the band is literally playing, you know, in the room with you, if that makes sense. Well, I mean, I'm sure I could see an I Hate God record there, you know, and you know, on your shelf. Yeah, it just sounds like they're literally right there. It just sounds so much better than you know, digital music. Even cassettes. Like I was listening to a cassette the other day, and while it's grimy and again like annoying, like it's annoying to play music that way, it does sound really good.
Yeah, it does
So
have its own certain quality. It's kind of, it's funny. It was a little while ago where it was sort of, I realized like, oh, cassettes are technically analog. It's kind of, it's funny when you think about that because I
yeah,
guess growing up, it sort of seemed like they got replaced by things that were somehow better quality, and
yeah.
yet they do have something to them.
Yeah. And again, like I don't know. Like I mean CDs were okay for what they were, but like, you know, you get one scratch on a CD and then it's over, you know? So again, like I don't know. I sometimes I feel like an asshole, like I'm presenting myself maybe in a way that I shouldn't. I am not anti-technology, right? I stream music like with the best of them. And I think in a lot of ways, like it makes music so much more accessible, you know? But at the same time, like vinyl sounds better.
Yep.
Cassettes to some extent sound better, you know? So it's like, you know, I guess maybe you do kind of both get the best of both worlds, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
Doing both, I suppose.
Now, I would imagine, almost certainly like me, you have mixed feelings about social media, but you do have a Facebook and an Instagram account for the band. So, in
Yeah.
terms of like promoting the band, you've mentioned the fact you're working on the next release.
Yeah.
Are they both equally good places for people to go to keep track of what the band's doing?
I don't really I don't use Facebook a ton anymore. Like why don't we say frame it this way? Like I've never me personally, I've never been a big social media person, right? I've never been the kind of person where it's like, "Hey, like I'm at a barbecue today and I just really Tom wanted you to know that, you know?" I've never been like that. Like I don't, you know, I don't need to tell people like when I'm taking a shit, for example. That being said, I do think you almost have to have these profiles if you want people to hear your music. And again, like, you know, could you, for example, get lucky? Like, you know, not have an Instagram page, not have a Facebook page, just put your music out there on Spotify and somehow like you develop a following. Yeah, that's definitely possible. It's also unbelievably rare, you know? So I feel it's the necessary evil. I
Yeah.
try to limit what I post, but the bottom line is like it's the way that people find out about things in the world that we live in. If you're asking me, does it, and I really mean this, like, does it pain me every single time I do it? Yes. But I'm resigned to the fact that like it kind of needs to happen. Unless you're famous. If you're famous, then it's a different story. If you're famous, you can kind of do whatever you want. But for somebody like me who is not, like, you kind of have to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's not exactly a positive note to end the interview on, but it's
Do you wanna end on something positive? Here, I'll say something positive. I hope people like this music. I really do. Like, I believe in it. I do think that it's a really great record. Obviously, I'm biased, you know, but like from all the people that have done reviews and have listened to it, everybody has something kind of unique to say about it. I hope that this record does for people what music does for me. You know, like if I'm in a shitty mood or if I want to be inspired, I think music is really powerful. Like, to be honest with you, I recorded all the scratch tracks for this record a couple of years ago. And honestly, even after we did the drums, I was so sort of defeated. Like I sort of left the record sitting for quite a long time until I saw Mastodon play Leviathan in full live. And I just felt great. And I said to myself in that moment, man, I really should put my record out. So that's a really positive way to end this. Maybe somebody, will get something from this and be inspired to do something, as long as it doesn't inspire them to like run someone over or fucking kill somebody, because that would be, I mean, say la vie, I suppose, but not my intention.
Nice. Ben, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure listening to the album. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I hope that you do get the opportunity to present this music on stage soon, because I'm sure you will put together a great experience for people.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.